Hey, this is Brit D from resistradio.com, and I'm joined again by Tom Secker from investigatingtheterror.com. Hi Tom, good to speak to you again.
Hi, Brit.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. So there's been some interesting news come out in the last week, and especially today. So I thought, of course, we should start with the underwear bomber news. What's your take on that?
I think my take on it is much the same as your take on it. You wrote an article today saying that in light of the previous, what are they called, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula underwear bombing attempt, the Detroit flight. I can't remember the flight number. After all the sort of fiasco with that, this one just seems like a kind of echoing of an idea. I mean, there doesn't actually seem to have been any actual plot here. It's not like it's not like with the previous one, where at least they did have this misguided young Nigerian lad on the plane trying to do something, heaven knows what, but at least they had that much. With this, the story basically seems to be, correct me if I'm wrong about this, the story basically seems to be the CIA have seized an improvised explosive device.
Yeah, that's exactly correct, yeah.
They don't seem to have arrested anyone.
That's not clear yet. There has been names sort of put out there, but there's really no evidence being presented that it is this guy, this supposed expert bomb maker. But yeah, you're right. The information is agents seized the device in Yemen before it could be passed to the would-be suicide bomber, who had yet to pick a target or buy any tickets, according to US officials. And there's another quote at the end of this article. US officials, meanwhile, sought to emphasize last night that there was never any threat to the public because US CIA agents were aware of the plot virtually from its inception. We were so on it. That's why we have the device, a White House source told CBS News. So obviously when you hear about plots that they're aware of virtually from the inception, I mean, you have to think, did they actually start this plot? And there's so much evidence of them having done that. We have so much evidence of these sting operations that they've been carrying out. And as you say, this wasn't even any kind of a plot. Nothing like the underwear bomber, which was a totally contrived incident, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and the thing is that, I mean, you kind of pointed it out, that what seems to have happened here is that the CIA intercepted this, in as much as anything was going on, the CIA intercepted it before anything actually happened, so that it's this. It's the same kind of double think and double speak that they always throw at us. This kind of, there was no actual imminent threat, but it's still big and scary enough for us to bother splashing all over the world's media. So they're sort of saying, be scared, but don't be too scared. I mean, don't do anything radical like stop paying your taxes or stop going shopping. But be scared enough that whatever is the aim of this is, they're getting their desired reaction. It's a kind of tension that they're putting out there. There is one other possibility, of course, that this might not necessarily be a kind of sting operation or a provocation or something like that. It could genuinely be that some Egypt has decided to try and build a bomb, and the CIA found out about it because presumably the CIA have lots and lots and lots of informants inside Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Mm-hmm. And so they just sort of, broke into this guy's house and stole whatever it was that he was trying to use to build a bomb. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of different possibilities here, but in any case, this isn't terrorism. There isn't any they're even saying there isn't any realistic threat here. So my question for them would sort of be, well, why the hell are you even telling us about it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess if they didn't and we found out about it, we would still be complaining about that. But I do take your point that this does seem to have no other effect other than making people scared or making people think, the government and the intelligence services are protecting us.
Well, yeah, you're right, that they don't just want us to sort of be scared of the big scary terrorists, the big scary Islamic terrorists. They also want us to think, and our boys they're on top of the job, and they're doing what needs to be done, and all of this stuff. So you're right, it's not just the fear that they're trying to generate, it is also the almost the reassuring narrative of the security services are on the job and they're doing what's right. It's both of those ideas that they seem to be putting out through this story, but apart from that, it doesn't seem to add up to anything at all. It's bizarre.
And of course, this feeds into the security industrial complex because I think there's talk of having to use new detection systems, because apparently this bomb didn't have metal parts in it, but as far as I'm aware, the one that Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib used back in December 2009, I don't think that had any metal parts in it either, so I don't really understand how they can get away with that one, claiming that they need new body imaging devices, but I'm sure they'll try anyway.
You're right, I'm sure they will try, and it certainly feeds into the ever-growing industry of building this security equipment, and not just that, of course, selling people the equipment and things. It is also a question of training and a question of establishing procedures. An awful lot of that stuff is farmed out to these security consultancies and these mercenary gun-for-hire firms and all the rest of them. It's almost like the whole thing is just a sort of open invitation for these vulture mercenary companies to kind of come in and just make money out of people being afraid. When I mean, I suppose the most fundamental thing here is there's nothing to be afraid of. Why should we be scared of this? Why should we even care?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what are the chances of actually being caught up in a terrorist attack? I mean, let alone,
well, if this is the state of the terrorists, if this is the condition of the terrorists, then what the hell are we so scared of? Why should people be scared of this?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, the other plot that allegedly came out of Yemen was the printer cartridge bombs, and I mean, they weren't even on passenger airlines, because they were actually planes that were just transporting mail, I think. So of course, somebody would die.
Just cargo planes or something.
Cargo planes, yeah. So of course, I mean, somebody would die, and obviously there's a chance the crashed aeroplane could hit on the ground, like at Lockerbie. But yeah, I mean, the chances are so incredibly minute that you're going to be caught in something like this, especially as you say, when they seem to be fairly inept. So yeah.
Well, and I mean, you're right. That I'd forgotten about that one. The whole printer cartridges, toner cartridges, bomb plot. And I remember as soon as that one happened, I'm sure if you use a search engine and look for this, you'll find that as on the day that was sort of exploded, that was put out there as a story, you had officials in both America and the UK using this infamous hallmarks of Al-Qaeda tag. They were instantly sticking that one on it. When, as far as I can tell, there isn't actually that much connection between this supposed terrorist group in Yemen, this Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and the supposed original Al-Qaeda terrorist group in the sort of Pakistan-Afghanistan area. Even these letters that, God knows how authentic these so-called bin Laden letters are, or whether they could be complete fakes, of course. But even those letters seem to indicate that bin Laden had very little to do with these, if you like, satellite or franchise Al-Qaeda terrorist groups. So even the official propaganda, if you like, is totally contradictory on this point and on this issue. So we are really being presented with not just a kind of politically conducive, politically useful narrative, but a narrative that doesn't make any bloody sense.
Yeah, they try to build a narrative by using the Al-Awlaki character, because he was alleged to have links to these Al-Qaeda terrorists in Yemen. But, I mean, I did some research into it, and the links were fairly tenuous, to say the least. They certainly tried to build him up as the kind of mentor of the underwear bomber, for which there's actually pretty little evidence. So yeah, that's quite interesting. And
well, even when Muttalib pleaded guilty, I don't think because he was originally going to try to plead not guilty, and he was going to try and defend himself and have Kurt Haskell as his defence witness. I mean, and he was going to represent himself, and God knows what was going through that guy's mind. And then suddenly, about a day or two into the trial, he completely reverses and decides to plead guilty. But even then, when he was pleading guilty, I don't think he admitted to any real connection with al-Awlaki. So you're right. I mean, they do sort of put these connections out there, but when you look at them, in particular when you sort of follow them up in the court proceedings and in things like that, you find that they're just a lot of the time these connections just aren't there.
Hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, on the day that the guy went down, Abdul Muttalab, I read some transcripts from the court, and he actually sounded like he had mental health issues to me. He was kind of ranting about ghosts and spirits and things like this. Apparently, he was very much into sort of African black magic, and it all sounded a bit strange to me. So, from what I read, there were certainly questions about the guy's sanity, and yeah, I mean, it was all pretty dodgy. Yeah, and then of course they also blew Al-Awlaki away. I think that was last year that happened. Another kind of summary assassination by the US, which sort of brings us on nicely to the related issue, which is the supposed killing of bin Laden, because this supposed threat that they've just foiled was of course supposed to happen near the anniversary of Osama bin Laden's death, which I'd be interested to hear your take on, actually, about what you think happened with the bin Laden raid.
It's hard to say exactly what happened there, but certainly the whole thing seems to be at least to some extent, a fabrication. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that that was actually bin Laden. I mean, this is the fundamental thing, that it was actually bin Laden that they killed in that raid. Assuming that there was a raid, assuming a couple of helicopters with US Navy SEALs actually turned up in Abbottabad on, what was it, May 1st, May 2nd last year, and, you know, repelled in and had some kind of shootout in this complex or compound, whatever they call it. They always call it something like that to make it sound more militaristic and more like a, you know, a proper fight, rather than, you know, just a bunch of special forces soldiers kicking the door in of a house and shooting some people. And assuming all of that actually happened and that they did actually find some people there and killed at least one of them. I mean, I think officially they shot more than one person.
I've seen photographs of 2 people that they shot dead. I'm not sure whether there are any more.
Right. Assuming all that actually happened, then that leaves us with the question of who did they kill? You know, who was actually in this house? Who was actually there? And okay, fair enough. There does seem to be a fair few eyewitnesses and things that saw something happening there in that house in Abbottabad. So, you know, we can accept quite a lot of this story without committing ourselves to the conclusion that it really had anything to do with bin Laden. And so, I mean, what's happened is a whole series of media organizations and a few kind of justice lobby organizations, I don't know quite what to call them, but people like Judicial Watch and the Associated Press and several others have filed Freedom of Information requests with the CIA and the Department of Defense for paperwork, for files, for records on this raid. And they were looking for emails within the kind of Special Forces, Special Operations Command, that would show that this was being planned, basically, that ahead of time they'd obviously got this information that bin Laden was there and therefore took the decision to, you know, carry out this Special Forces raid. And they said apparently nothing came back on that front. They also asked for the photographs from the raid itself and also the details of how the CIA supposedly carried out a sort of analysis of photos of this dead body, presumably emailed to them or something from Pakistan, and other photos of bin Laden, and that this is one of the ways they established that the person was actually bin Laden. So they requested records on all of that. The CIA basically have refused to point blank to answer to one of these requests to process them, and they asked the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, for the same, and they asked them for records of these DNA tests that were supposedly carried out, and the Department of Defense said they didn't refuse to release them. They said they don't have any.
Yeah.
They said these records do not exist.
Yeah.
Right, so they've, you know, this guy that they've been supposedly chasing since 1998, at least, if not before, so they've been chasing him for 13 years by this point. You'd think that if they actually thought, we finally got him, we got him, boys, we killed him, you know, he's no longer a threat, you would have thought the process that they went through to ensure that they'd got the right man, that they had actually killed this apparently evil terrorist mastermind, that the process would be incredibly meticulous and incredibly well documented, and that even with the limits on the Freedom of Information Act, they could have sent out a few files that had most of the stuff redacted, but at least kind of confirmed that some kind of process went on. But they didn't do any of that. And it is absolutely baffling to me as to why they didn't. Why didn't they at least fake something? From a covert ops point of view, just fake something. No one out there is going to know any difference if you send them some faked document with, most of the information is blacked out. So why didn't they do that? But they didn't. They said that they didn't have any records at all. And so this kind of, it presents us with a real problem, or it presents them with a real problem, because they've also recently made a made a move to have the case against bin Laden, the court case, the federal court case in America, the US versus Osama bin Laden case, have it ended, basically, have a ruling of no prosecution and no further pursuing of this suspect. Because in this case, he was actually found guilty in his absence for the 1998 embassy bombings in East Africa. In the trial in 2001, they did actually find bin Laden guilty, even though obviously he wasn't. They never actually had him on the stand to find him guilty. Bizarrely, they never indicted him for 9/11, and that's always been a kind of bone of contention in the 9/11 truth movement. Yeah. And now they've made a ruling. They're claiming he's officially finally dead. They applied to have a ruling of, that this case will basically be ended, that the file will be closed. And in this case, you had a guy from the Department of Justice, the National Security Division of the Department of Justice, going to the court and making this application and saying that, he'd been through all the records and that he'd spoken with people from the Department of Defense and the CIA, and that he'd confirmed that all of this had actually happened and that this individual was actually Osama bin Laden. So it's not certain, but it's very much implied by what he says in this court transcript, and I'll stick it up on my website. It's very much implied that he has seen these records, and that some kind of records, whether real or whether authentic or fake, do actually exist. So we're kind of left with the question: why this kind of absurd theatre with the Freedom of Information request, with the Pentagon basically saying, we have no paperwork on this, we have no records on this. I mean, it really is baffling to me. Like I say, why didn't they just fake something?
Yeah, I mean, it is baffling. I mean, I guess it just shows how they can get away with anything. So, I mean, I guess it would be safer for them to simply say they don't have them than to fake something that they could be, caught out on a later stage. I'll just read out some information about what you've just been talking about there in case anybody actually missed this story, which was from armytimes.com. And yeah, it's about the AP, the Associated Press, who made 20 separate requests, FOIA requests, Freedom of Information requests, mostly the day after bin Laden's supposed killing. And yeah, the Pentagon said they couldn't locate any photographs or video taken during the raid or showing bin Laden's body. It also said it could not find any images of bin Laden's body on the Navy aircraft carrier where the Al-Qaeda leader's body was taken. It couldn't find the death certificate, autopsy report, or results of DNA identification tests for bin Laden, or any pre-raid materials discussing how the government planned to dispose of bin Laden's body if he were killed. So that's just totally ridiculous.
Well, and it almost smacks of like they didn't really think this one through, like it was a bit of a rush job. I mean, it's not like we had any... You remember, in the last couple of years before this, whatever happened in Abbottabad, they weren't really talking about bin Laden very much, were they? They were talking about kind of spin-offs, like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Lashkar-e-Taiba in Pakistan, and it was, it was all about, Mumbai-style attacks and groups that had splintered off from Al-Qaeda and all of this kind of thing. They were talking about this much kind of broader, more sort of decentralized set of terrorist groups. And they weren't really kind of all that obsessive about bin Laden for the last 2, 3, maybe 4, 5 years before they did whatever it is that they did. So it does smack to me that maybe this was a rush job. Maybe this was just a kind of PR thing, a war propaganda, if you like, a big success, waving the flag, rally round the flag, that kind of thing. That's what a lot of people think it was. But it strikes me that if it was that it was a not particularly well executed version of that. And that's why we're now being presented with this rather absurd situation whereby they're saying they don't have any records of having planned this, having considered what they were going to do, or having actually done it. So,
But this makes it even more kind of worrying to me, because the mainstream media has simply, in the main, largely run with this Osama bin Laden killing story, as they did today with the underwear bomber story. They've run with the story. There's no kind of critical analysis, really. I mean, the mainstream media is just simply repeating what they're told by the government and by the intelligence services.
No, you're dead right. I mean, they filed this Freedom of Information request. It's kind of come back with this absurd answer. Why aren't the Associated Press going absolutely nuts about this? Why aren't they making a big fuss about this? You're right. It's that, if anything, is the sort of most worrying aspect of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, presumably, well, one would have to presume that they filed those requests simply to get some material to sell newspapers with, rather than for the purposes of investigative journalism.
Yeah. I think that's safe to assume. You're right there.
Yeah. So yeah, there's they also refuse to confirm or deny the existence of helicopter maintenance logs and reports about the performance of military gear used in the raid. And apparently the Defense Department invoked what is known as a GLOMAR response. And this refers to the 1970s, when the CIA refused to confirm or deny the existence of the Glomar Explorer, a ship the agency used in the attempted salvage of a sunken Soviet submarine. So yeah, complete denial here from the Defense Department and the Pentagon. At least the CIA have said that they actually do have videos and photographs. They claim to have, I think, 53 of them. But as you also mentioned, the organisation Judicial Watch applied to have those released, and last week that was denied by a federal judge who agreed with what they claimed, that to release these documents would be, in the risking national security, basically, which is the standard line, we're always fed when the authorities are trying to cover something up. So
yeah, of course it is, but again, I mean, how much sense does this make? In what way is it a risk to national security? I mean, if everything they're saying is true, which obviously it isn't, I'm not entirely sure what the truth is. I'm speculating a bit that this was some kind of not particularly well carried out propaganda operation. But even if everything they were saying was true, this guy's dead. Possible threat to national security is it to release at least, like helicopter maintenance logs? What possible threat to national security would it be to release that? I mean, everyone knows that they do these sorts of things. Everyone knows that the United States Army has helicopters and has special forces commandos, and that they carry out commando raids. This isn't in any way secret information. For God's sake, they make computer games based around this stuff to try and, that's part of the propaganda, part of the glorification of war. So the very notion that they can't release this information because of, national security is... It's a complete farce. It's a complete nonsense.
I mean, the only aspect you could maybe think they had a point is about the actual corpse photos of bin Laden, if he would, being killed in such a gruesome way, apparently through the eye socket with his brain splattered out. I mean, that could make some people
didn't they
angry,
put out some photos that were supposedly of bin Laden's corpse, although it's rather quickly emerged that quite a lot of those pictures were obvious and rather not very well done fakes.
Yeah, someone did. Yeah, I don't know who put those out. I mean, I don't think that actually came from
official sources. No. They seem to have been drummed up by media entities. But there again, why would the media be? Well, I suppose no. The media is quite a sort of voyeuristic entity in that respect. The mainstream media, they do like their kind of gory stories, and so therefore I can imagine them just slapping together some vaguely bin Laden dead corpse shot through the eye kind of picture just to draw some attention to their story on it. I mean, maybe that's what it's about. Maybe everyone's going to be reporting on this story, of course. So how do you make your story about it stand out? Everyone's story contains the same details because the only things that they know about it is what Barack Obama and the Defense Department said about it. So they're all writing essentially the same story. So the only way to differentiate it, I suppose, is to have a picture that other people don't have. And so therefore they might have just, coded something up, coded something together.
Well, we don't know where they actually came from. I mean, that could just be somebody, sat at home on a computer who knocked the images up, I think, and that was then picked up by the press. I don't know whether
Could
they were
be.
actually. I don't know whether the press would doctor something like that. It would be a bit risky, but they could have done. But yeah, I mean that they could have a slight point there about that. But even then, I mean, who's going to, which Muslim potential terrorist is suddenly going to be pushed over the edge by seeing this image of Bin Laden's corpse? I mean, if you're gonna bomb somebody and kill some people, you're gonna do that anyway. It's not going to take seeing an image of Bin Laden's corpse to push you over the edge to commit that act of terrorism. So
Well, I mean, certainly, in the grand scheme of things, it's quite absurd to suggest that picture alone could sort of, tip someone over the edge to committing a terrorist attack. I would have thought the decades-long wars of aggression against the Middle East and the fact that the CIA has been meddling in the Middle East and causing all sorts of violence there, basically since its inception, for as long as it's existed, I would have thought that's a much more significant factor in why some Middle Easterners decide to turn towards violence and turn towards militancy and terrorism than, any photograph of some supposed dead terrorist mastermind that may not have ever actually existed.
yeah, sure. I mean, the images of deformed children in Fallujah, for example, or the many images that circulate of blown up children. I mean, there are plenty of these distressing images, and I'm sure they're being widely circulated in the Islamic world. Yeah, so that's a fair point. Yeah. So, shall we move on to another story now, which
Yeah, sure.
which it would be good to talk about, and that's the MI6 spy in a bag. Maybe I should just talk a little bit about this first, in case there are any sort of listeners from the US who aren't so familiar with this story. If you've been listening to my older shows and reading some of my stuff, you probably will be, but this is the case of the guy who was working for MI6 in England, whose dead body was found padlocked inside a sports holdall in the bath of his London flat, and they've just recently concluded an inquest into his death, which was inconclusive, though the coroner said quite sort of understandably that she thought there was some kind of criminal act behind this, that basically it was a murder, but they couldn't establish how, why or when this guy died. And there's been all kinds of criticism of MI6, the fact that they seem to have withheld evidence from the police, or at least the people who were interviewing them did, the counter-terrorism team who were interviewing them did. The fact that they didn't report this guy, whose name was Gareth Williams, missing from work for 8 days, when standard procedure at MI6 is apparently to report somebody missing if they don't come into work by 10 p.m. So, really in breach of standard policy there. And yeah, there's all kinds of dodgy things about this case. And a new story has just come out today that in fact the Metropolitan Police has ordered that a review be done of the forensic evidence relating to this case, which was another aspect of the original inquiry, which was pretty dubious because the forensics company LGC Forensics made a big cock-up, and DNA that they found on Gareth Williams' hand that they thought could belong to whoever had been involved in his death actually turned out to be from a forensic scientist at the scene, and that wasn't picked up for quite some time, and that had been due to an error made at this LGC Forensics company. So the whole thing is just a big mess, basically. And I haven't actually talked to you about this, Tom. So what were your sort of main thoughts relating to this spy in a bag case?
Well, firstly, the whole spy in a bag tag is another one of those kind of lurid,
It is, yeah.
rather unpleasant ways in which the media has reported on this. I mean, I kind of understand the need for shorthand. I understand the need for abbreviations and that kind of thing, but that I can see where they're coming from, but it does make me a bit uncomfortable that that's the way they're describing this case. I mean, given that this guy it's rather obvious that this guy's been murdered. For what reason and by whom, we can only really guess at this point. But it's very insensitive,
It is, yeah.
the way they've done this, and you can't help but think that this is, if this guy wasn't an MI6 agent, I mean, he was originally GCHQ, wasn't he? He was originally a code breaker for GCHQ, and then they, seconded him to MI6 for whatever task they wanted him for. I can't help but think that if he was just, say, a policeman who died in these kinds of circumstances, they wouldn't care as much. But because it's an MI6 agent, and because that's all a bit James Bond, and it's all a bit kind of, it's all a bit sexy, and it's all a bit exciting, and therefore they've all got a bit carried away with this, and kind of completely lost sight of the fact that someone's been killed here, and presumably someone's been killed here for a pretty dark and ugly and as yet secret reason. And that's not good. That's not something we should be kind of laughing at. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there is a amusing element to this because it is so strange. They find MI6 agent locked inside a sports hold doll in a bath in his flat. You don't get much weirder deaths than that. So I can understand that, you laughing, and I it has amused me at times. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and deny that. But at the same time, it does bother me that that's the way they've described it.
Let me just be clear. I mentioned that myself in one of my own shows, that this was pretty insensitive. And I should stop using that phrase, really. I've picked that up as a bad habit. And I agree, there's nothing funny about this, but I mean, there was a certain absurd element when the guy was trying to reconstruct the climbing into the bag. I mean...
that was certainly funny. I can't deny that was...
Yeah, but I take your point totally, that this is certainly something to be made light of, no. So carry on.
Well, as to the forensics thing, you said they found DNA on his body that it turned out was actually the DNA of one of the investigators.
That's right, yeah.
So presumably, unless by some freak or bizarre conspiracy that person was actually involved in murdering him, which is, it's possible. You can't rule these things out, but it probably didn't happen. It's probably, it probably is just a complete cock-up. That is rather worrying that that's the state of forensic science investigation in this country. I mean, this is Great Britain. I don't mean to get kind of all nationalistic about it, because I'm not really nationalistic, but I just would have thought we were better than that. I would have thought our authorities were... and even private forensics companies should be better than that. And if they're not, why the hell are they getting the contracts for doing this kind of work?
Yeah, I mean, this was apparently an inputting error, so some operative at their laboratory had actually put the wrong code into the computer or something. I mean, we won't go into this now, but I mean, this is one of a few errors that have been made by this same company, because there was a rape case that collapsed recently due to contamination at one of their laboratories. And also a case that I'm very interested in, which is the murder of Stephen Lawrence and the recent conviction of two men for his murder, which was based entirely on forensics evidence from this LGC Forensics, which there was a lot of dispute about. I mean, the defense team's argument was based entirely on the supposed non-credibility of this forensics evidence, which does sound very dodgy, to say the least. So yeah, the Met today anyway have announced a new private company are going to be re-examining all the evidence. So I mean, you can imagine the kind of distress that this has caused the family, because apparently this was the biggest hope they had of actually finding anybody who might have been responsible for Gareth Williams' death, and it turned out to be, a complete cock-up.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure they've been through hell over this, because however sort of bizarre and macabre it might seem to us, that guy was someone's son.
Yeah, I mean, the smear campaign that's gone on against him as well in the press is
all
quite,
these
quite
sort of
outrageous.
implications of weird sex and all of
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
yeah,
And I mean, who knows? Who knows what this guy was into? Who knows how much of this is true and how much of this is false? But it's certainly not something they should be trumpeting in the press as a kind of, if you like, smokescreen for the fact that what basically seems to have happened here is MI6 have had the Met Police turn up and say, what happened with this guy? What can you tell us about him? Because we're kind of stumped with this case. And MI6 have kind of said, well, sod off, we're not telling you anything.
yeah,
They've just sort of said we're not cooperating with this murder inquiry, which means in effect everyone who they've spoken to in MI6 is guilty of obstruction of justice. And if we lived in any kind of system where there was accountability for the security services, MI6 would be slapped with obstruction of justice, and this would be a major political storm. And it should be. It really should be, because even if MI6 had absolutely nothing to do with this guy dying, they still left it a week after he disappeared, and presumably a week after he was killed, before they raised any kind of alarm about it. And this is MI6, for heaven's sake. That story is not true.
yeah.
I don't mean to kind of say things that I can't prove. Obviously, I can't actually physically prove that that story isn't true, but it isn't true. I am as certain of it as I am of anything, that they did not just accidentally mislay their genius code breaker that they'd borrowed from GCHQ. They just mislaid him for a week. He just slipped through the system. He just slipped through the cracks. That isn't true. That didn't happen. So essentially the only information they've given us on this case is a blatant lie, and everything else they've just stonewalled. They've basically refused to answer the questions about it. So, and they've gone through the usual charade with anonymous witnesses, and another witness called Witness G is just like at the July 7th inquests in 2010-11, that they put up these sort of anonymous, almost... I mean, actually, to be fair, in this case, didn't they put up someone who was his supervisor? So someone who was actually kind of in a position of authority to talk about this case.
Yeah, he was one of the people who gave testimony, but anonymously, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, sure, it was still anonymous, but what I'm saying is there is a slight difference. In the July 7th inquests, it was even worse. MI5 put up what they called a corporate witness, i.e. a guy who had no connection with any of these operations. He had no first-hand knowledge of any of these cases or any of the things they were asking him about.
Oh, right,
He was just basically a spokesperson. Whereas at least, I suppose, in this case, they've put up someone who is in some kind of position of knowledge, but what they've said seems to be completely untrue, so does it make much odds?
Yeah, I think there was his line manager and then the person above him, and they basically both sort of, I think one blamed the other, and then they basically sort of wrote it off as a communications failure. But as you say, I mean, I don't really see how this could have happened, because, I mean, he had actually missed two meetings, two scheduled meetings as well as not being at work. And he just returned from an assignment in the US. Apparently he'd been to some kind of hacker conference in Las Vegas, which would have been more reason for them to say, well, where is this guy? Has he come back from the US, or what's going on here? But seemingly not. So,
well,
and
I'm
also,
no, go on.
Oh yeah, I was just going to mention as well about the stuff that they apparently had, because he had this locker, a locker with 9 USB sticks in it, and also under his desk in his office at MI6 was a bag which was very similar to the bag he was actually killed in. I mean, so that's that could be crucial evidence, and that apparently was withheld, which is also pretty dodgy.
I mean, I agree with you. Yeah, everything you just said about this. The thing about, I mean, even if we thought that this second private forensics company who is going to conduct this review of evidence, even if we thought, even if we believed they're perfectly competent and capable and that there's nothing wrong with that kind of process, I have my doubts, but even if we assumed it's true, what are they going to find? Basically, this case hinged on MI6 refusing to answer the Met Police's questions. That's why this case has gone nowhere. That's why this case hasn't got a hope in hell of being solved. That's the issue here, above and beyond forensics cock-ups, because although that those cock-ups are important, I just think there's something so much bigger at stake here, and that is that the secrecy of these organisations trumps the justice institutions in this country. There is nothing the police can actually do to compel answers from MI6, and as a result, however much they might get the BBC to put out documentaries saying, "Oh no, we don't have a license to kill. We're not above the law. We're everything. We play by the rules. We don't do things that are just not cricket in this country. We're a perfectly moral organisation, and we're just doing our best to keep people safe." They can say that as many times as they like, but when it comes down to it, in a case like this, and this is hardly the first instance of something like this, but this case just proves it all over again. The security institutions trump the justice institutions. They are higher up in the hierarchy. That much is obvious. And therefore, in a very literal sense, they are above the law.
Yeah, that's scary. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the latest news to come out today is that the Met are considering a mass screening program among the spies' colleagues at MI6. But Bernard Hogan Howe, who's the Met Commissioner, stressed that without an official suspect in the case, they could not compel anyone to take part in a DNA screening program. So I wonder how many of the people at MI6 are actually going to come forward and give DNA samples.
Well, I imagine it'll be one of two things. I mean, this is because they did, aside from the DNA of this forensic investigator, they did actually find a couple of other people's DNA, didn't they?
Yeah.
In the flat that they haven't identified, and they would therefore be the obvious, murder suspects. Assuming, I mean, this guy must have been murdered. They've sort of tried to cast doubt on that, but even the coroner at the inquest said, as you said at the top of this discussion, she basically said, this guy was murdered. We don't know how or why or who did it because we don't have access to the evidence to be able to do that. But basically, it's obvious that this guy was murdered. But legally, the coroner couldn't return a verdict of unlawful killing because they didn't have the evidence to do so. So they had to kind of fudge it. And I don't really blame the coroner too much in this instance. I don't really see what else they could have done. Much as I would like to blame coroners and blame people in justice institutions, I think this time they were kind of outmaneuvered by MI6. So presumably, yeah, the Met can do this screening, attempt at screening MI6 agents in the hope of coming up with some match for this DNA, this unidentified DNA. One of two things will happen. Either MI6 will refuse point blank to cooperate, which, since the Met don't have anything directly connecting their boys, their agents, to this murder, they can probably do, and they'll probably, if they do that, they'll get away with it. Or they'll put up loads and loads of people who they know have nothing to do with this and let their DNA be taken and compared against these samples from the guy's flat, waste lots of money, waste lots of time, waste lots of effort, and by that point everyone will have forgotten about it and the story will be dropped. Yeah. And then, if anything, it will be blamed back on the Met Police for wasting everyone's time and wasting all this public money testing the DNA of innocent people.
Yeah.
It will go one of those two ways. I can't really see a third option.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, there's been some kind of extraordinary theories come out in the mainstream media actually this week. To say that they're quite quick to label anybody who comes up with an alternative theory a conspiracy theorist. The media themselves have been doing quite a good job of it this week. This was from the Mail. Did spy and bag killer slip back into flat through skylight to cover his tracks? So this is a theory that whilst the police whilst the police were actually outside his flat after his body had been discovered, that somebody sneaked back in through the skylight to wipe all of the fingerprints or whatever. It's kind of ridiculous, really. But just to go back to
the Daily Mail do love a conspiracy theory. To be fair, their paper is absolutely chock full of this nonsense.
But to go back to the information that people try to spread about Gareth Williams, about the bondage and things like this, I mean, I suspect this was part of an attempt to cover up this murder, because he was kind of pictured as some kind of bondage fetishist, but apparently he'd only actually visited 4 bondage sites in 2 years, so that aspect of it had been totally overblown. I mean, because that doesn't sound like somebody who's obsessed with bondage or whatever. There'd been suggestions he'd been to a gay club and things like this, which, I mean, doesn't really mean anything.
I've been to a gay club. You won't find me, suffocated and locked in a hold all in my bathtub. I'm pretty sure of that much.
No, but apparently he hadn't even actually been to the gay club anyway. So there's this apparent video of him in cowboy boots dancing naked. I mean, that's not really proof of anything. So I think this was a big attempt to smear him. I mean, there was actually a reasonable article that came out of the Daily Mirror of all places, the Mirror. It was an article by, let me just pull that up. It was by a former intelligence operative, I think. Sorry, I'm just pulling that up now. This was by Crispin Black. I don't know whether you know.
Yeah, he's former, Defence Intelligence staff, military intelligence.
That's it, yeah.
I think.
And in this article, he just, talks about all of the people who've worked for the intelligence agencies and the number of people who've been found dead in similar circumstances to Gareth Williams. Some kind of bizarre sexual.
You mean similar in the respect of it being strange and it having a possible sexual dimension rather than the specific spy in a bag scenario?
Not in a bag, no, but I mean equally odd. And he lists a number of people who actually even worked for GCHQ. I mean, I'll just mention a few of those. Won't go into huge detail, but some guy in 1983 who worked as a clerk there was found dead at home with a plastic bag over his head. In 97, somebody else from there was found dead at home dressed in a bra and panties with a plastic bag over his head. 2 years later, a language expert at GCHQ was found dead in bed at home with a plastic bag over his head and a dust mask over his mouth. It sort of carries on, I mean, there's no evidence really that these were all murders, but it certainly does make you think, because that would be the perfect way to smear somebody and to kind of stifle an investigation into a murder, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, because I mean, I certainly think this is part of some kind of concerted effort to, I think, distract people from the fundamental question of, why are MI6 so resistant to this investigation? I'm not saying that this guy was killed by MI6. I don't know who killed Gareth Williams. Obviously, I don't. I wouldn't put it past MI6 to kill one of their own agents, particularly if he actually worked for another agency for whatever reason they deemed suitable for killing him. But I don't have any evidence that they did. Nonetheless, they've obviously tried to cover this thing up. And yeah, these stories of there's also stories of him having if you like, an almost obsessive compulsive kind of personality. Apparently he bought all of this very fashionable, very expensive menswear, and that
women's wear. Yeah,
right.
He had a cupboard full of really expensive women's clothing.
Right.
This was another aspect of it, and they were trying to make out he was a transvestite, but his sister actually said she didn't believe he was, and other witnesses said that they thought these were gifts that he was going to give to female friends. But yeah, it was a cupboard full of expensive women's wear that he actually had, not men's wear.
Well, or he may have had a shopping compulsion. He may have just bought these things because he liked the look of them. Some people do just, buy things that they have absolutely no intention of ever using or wearing, or whatever you might use the thing for, but just buy it because they like it. Yeah. As an impulsive thing. So he may have just been what they call, a shopping addict or something stupid like that. There's all kinds of explanations for why he might have a cupboard full of women's dresses. But yeah, it very much seems like an attempt to smear the guy and an attempt to make people think, oh, he was killed as part of some salacious sexual conspiracy, a jealous lover, or some kind of love triangle, or, exactly the sort of thing, no doubt, that the Daily Mail writers have been sort of implying in their stories.
also kind of autoerotic activity, because there was also a claim that he'd visited claustrophilia websites, which I'd never heard of at the time, but that's obviously a sexual fetish about being in enclosed spaces, but apparently that was not true as well, and he hadn't actually visited any of those websites.
What? So what were they trying to suggest? That he'd locked himself in this bag as some kind of bizarre masturbatory activity and accidentally suffocated himself?
Yeah, that was the insinuation, that he had died as part of an autoerotic action. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure that didn't happen. Not because people aren't into these things, but quite simply because I don't believe it was physically possible for him to lock and padlock himself inside this sports bag. So yeah, it's you said before that the Daily Mail had this kind of conspiracy theory about someone sneaking through the skylight to wipe clear the crime scene and all of this kind of stuff. And yeah, that's one of the things that's so kind of obvious that's come out of this case, and so basic that's come out of this case, is that, you know, no matter where you go with this, people are going to suspect some kind of conspiracy. Whether people suspect that he was killed by MI6 because he was, I don't know, disgruntled and about to leak some secret information, or maybe he'd, you know, blown an operation, or maybe he was planning to switch to the other side, or you know, there's any number of reasons why why MI6 could have killed this guy and decided to kill this guy. There's any number of reasons why other people could have as well. But pretty much wherever you go, you're going to believe there's some kind of dark conspiracy. And that's partly simply because the guy's an MI6 agent. But it is also this extremely strange and unusual way in which he died. It just kind of portends to something bigger, to some kind of bigger story with this. So I suppose what it, aside from the ethical and judicial issues here, you also have a kind of cultural issue that this is going to be another one of those focal points for conspiracy theories. And I mean conspiracy theories in the completely generic sense, in the sense that, you know, everyone's a conspiracy theorist because everyone at some point has some kind of suspicion that people are up to something. Everyone suspects that there's something going on here. There's some kind of secret here that we aren't privy to. And obviously not very many people actually know what that is. So we're kind of presented with that scenario as well, that it's once again, it's an example of how conspiracy theories are being advocated in the mainstream, even though they're not really calling them conspiracy theories. But they, in every other sense, they are exactly the same as any conspiracy theory that you or me might talk about.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah. So the media is happy to come up with its own theories to sell papers, but whenever someone from the alternative media comes up with a similar theory, or even a more credible theory, then they're smeared as conspiracy theorists.
But, you know, we're all conspiracy theorists.
Well, you can't help but be a conspiracy theorist when you hear a story like the Gareth Williams case. I mean, because it is just so suspicious. It really is. I mean, of course, yeah, MI6 might not have actually murdered him. I mean, he could have been murdered by anyone. I did read some speculation that he was working as part of some kind of computer virus to attack computers in Iran. I'm not sure where I read that, and that's obviously unconfirmed, but you know, if that's the case, he could well have been killed by, you know, a foreign intelligence agency, and then possibly MI6, you know, tried to cover that up.
Yeah. It's always a possibility. I mean, but that's another thing that kind of nags me a bit about this case, is that if this guy was a field operative, if he was a James Bond, you know, a guy who was actually going out and infiltrating terrorist groups or mafia groups or whatever the hell he might, you know, whatever the target might be, I could kind of understand someone like that winding up dead in a strange way, and I wouldn't necessarily suspect that it was actually MI6 that did it, because there's any number of, you know, his cover might get blown and the terrorists kill him, or the mafia kills him, or whoever kills him. You know, that's perfectly kind of plausible. But why would a code breaker, a guy who spends his time hacking and doing other sort of computer, cyber-based spying activities, how would he end up, you know, getting killed by some outsider? Unless, I suppose you're right, unless it was a foreign intelligence agency, because they would have the reach and they would, to be able to trace him and find out who he was and therefore get to him and kill him. So yeah, it's a possibility. It's in fact, it's quite a realistic possibility, but again, just a kind of guess at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there was a report that he'd apparently made unauthorized searches on the MI6 database. There weren't any details provided about that, but apparently that did give a theoretical risk of foreign intelligence services wanting to get him. There weren't many details about that, but there was a definite reference to unauthorized searches that he'd made. So I don't know, maybe he found information that he shouldn't have done. There was also, of course, reports about friction at MI6 because he didn't like the culture there, didn't like London, he didn't like MI6 working culture, the flash car and after work drinking culture. I think he complained about.
Yeah, there is certainly a lot of spies have said there's a big drinking culture in the security services, which is rather worrying in all sorts of ways. So I can understand the guy being unhappy there completely. Whether or not that has anything to do with his death, nothing's really coming to me on that front. Maybe they would have, like I say, maybe he was going to leak something. Maybe you're right. Maybe he stumbled across some information that really bothered him, and maybe they suspected he was about to go rogue and leak it to someone and got rid of him. Again, it's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's speculation, of course, but that's what we're here to do: use the available evidence and try and come up with credible speculation, basically. So
and just sort of flesh the thing out and get people thinking about it.
Yeah, so it's been a good chat today, Tom, and of course we're going to be appearing on Red Ice Radio together at the end of the month, talking about the Anders Breivik case, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, we didn't get time to discuss that today, but there's been plenty of other stuff to go over. I'm looking forward to the Red Ice thing. It's they've got quite a big audience. It should be a good one, a good opportunity to sort of reach out to some people with some ideas and some information.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you'd like to tell people where they can find your website, we'll draw this show to a close. But it's been a good chat, and thanks for joining me again, Tom.
Yeah, you can find all of my stuff, my films, my writings, an awful lot of my research and everything at investigatingtheterror.com. And thank you, Brit. It's been good talking to you, mate.
Okay, Tom. Cheers. I'll catch you next time.
Yeah, cheers, mate.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.